A quick note before we begin. Thank you for your interest in my first video of this series. It's taken me by surprise to see it do so well. If you do enjoy this series and this video, please consider subscribing and liking this video. It helps a lot to see this kind of feedback. Now onto the show. One visual difference you may see in a shooter is the actual character movement, how fast a character can walk, run, or change their momentum. Movement is a core part of any game, including shooters. It drastically changes how each game is played. As such, each game handles this differently, depending on the type of gameplay the developers want. In order to run as fast as you can in CSGO, you'd have to pull out your knife. Of course, this also means you no longer have a gun to shoot with. Each weapon has a movement penalty to it. Moving around with it up in your hands will be slower than moving with a P90, so it's beneficial to pull out your knife if you need to move fast. In Apex Legends, you have two ways to run. First is with a sprint button, and then to sprint as fast as possible, you holster your weapons. In most games, when you are on full sprint, you generally will not be able to fire your gun. You will have to stop your sprint in order to use your weapon. There are exceptions, of course. Titanfall 2, for example, allows players to use their weapon in almost any scenario, but more on that later. Hardcore or realistic games, such as Insurgency Sandstorm, has a different approach with its speed, where your overall loadout affects the weight of your character. Your speed is limited to how much or how little you take with you. So if you're carrying a heavy weapon and a lot of ammo, you'll be stuck at a lower speed. But if you take an SMG instead, you'll be faster. This game also doesn't care what weapon you're actively holding, only how much gear you have on you. So regardless if you're running with a knife or a gun, you'll still be running at top speed based on your weight. Movement speeds vary from game to game. Some games like Overwatch or Team Fortress 2 will have speed based on the character you choose. This also happens in Rainbow Six Siege. Some of these characters may have special abilities that allow them to sprint or teleport faster than other classes, or have a unique movement no one else has. Usually in a setup like this, faster characters will typically also have the least amount of health or armor. This keeps the game balanced by having a speedy character act like a glass cannon, one who can deal damage and zip around, but also would have the least amount of health to work with. In a game like Apex Legends, each character has their own abilities and their own hitbox. In short, the hitbox determines where the character can actually take damage. So if the character is small, their hitbox may be larger than the actual character model itself. Respawn, the developers of Apex Legends, has been trying to adjust the hitbox for Wraith and Pathfinder primarily, as one is short and the other is tall and lanky. As you can see from this image, their hitbox is actually a little larger than the actual character. This is to try and make it so the character can't abuse their movement, to the point of being impossible to hit. They also added a low-profile passive penalty to these characters, which means they take slightly more damage than other classes, as each character in Apex Legends has the same base health. With the changes Respawn has been making, they're planning to remove their penalty to the smaller characters in hopes that the hitbox rework is good enough. Overwatch handles health differently, by having each character have their own amount of health based on their role, and each character would still take the same amount of damage unlike in Apex Legends. Team Fortress 2 does the same thing as well, basing health on the character's class. As you can see, the movement system in a shooter affects many other parts of the game. What weapons you carry, the hitboxes, and even the health of each character. The movement system can also affect the map design as discussed before. The same way movement speed is different, so is movement momentum. Try this experiment with a few shooters. Walk or run for a few seconds, then jump. Don't press any other buttons and see how far your character actually moves from that jump. See how long it takes for the character to actually stop moving. This is your momentum. Some games like Halo have a very floaty movement system. This means if you jump, you're stuck in the air for a while. If you run, you'll take a fair bit of time to stop. This also prevents a player from being able to strafe left and right like CSGO, Apex Legends, or many other shooters. I'd also like to mention in Apex Legends, Warzone, and other shooters, you tend to strafe slower when you're aiming down sight. In Halo, the movement system can't really be abused in a normal manner. It's more of a follow your own momentum, rather than trying to shift it to another direction. Now let's look at a polar opposite version of this. In Titanfall 2, there are many ways to continue your momentum. Not only that, but you also have ways to shift that momentum to different directions, such as a grappling hook, jetpacks, and wall running. This essentially turns the entire map into a jungle gym or an obstacle course. If you can familiarize yourself enough with the map layout, you can zip around to your heart's content. I also wanted to add it here that you also have games such as Unreal Tournament and Doom where they use a lot of movement in their games, and it really is just a matter of keeping that momentum going in a straight line as much as possible. Not too long ago, Call of Duty attempted to use advanced movement in their games, Advanced Warfare, Black Ops 3, and Infinite Warfare. These movements can be things like sliding, double jumps, or wall running. This was a big change for the franchise, and as such, it was something not everyone enjoyed. As the more movement options you have in a game, the harder it can be to actually hit your target. This turns the game from being about your ability to aim to your ability to dodge. Depending on what you want to focus, having too much momentum can be a bad thing. If it can be abused, people will take full advantage. There should be a penalty for making these kind of movements, so they have a downside and can put the player at risk. One other thing to add about movement is the ability to cancel your animations or your momentum. Much like a fighting game, you can make micro movements and adjustments to bait your opponent to making a bad move.
I have the dummy set to random guard, and one handy thing here is that I can actually use a hit confirm. So I can use the timing of the fireball to decide whether I need to press the button for the super or not.
With shooters, you can also make these movements so your opponents miss. As crucial as it is to have good reflexes and recoil control, it's just as important to be fluid with your movements. These movement cancels are unique to every game, and they can be as simple as strafing like we see on CSGO or Valorant, move left, stop for a split second, then move right, and strafing works in nearly any shooter, but it may not work as well in others. It's still a great baseline mechanic to learn overall, regardless. In Apex Legends, you have the ability to slide. At any given time during the slide, you're able to jump out of this slide. In this sense, you're canceling out of your slide into another movement. You can also slide in Warzone, however, this slide is much more limited. In Apex Legends, you can slide virtually forever, so long as you can find ways to keep up that momentum. In Warzone, you can only slide so far. With this said, Warzone also has a slide cancel. To explain this, Warzone has two types of sprint: tactical and regular sprint. Tactical sprint is when the weapon is pointed upwards. This is the fastest your character can run, but it doesn't last long. However, you can change tactical sprints together by sliding. You will need to tac sprint, slide, then at least on PC, you tap your crouch button to cancel the slide, then tap your sprint button. By doing this, you can reach full speed again and trigger that tactical sprint. This does sound a little clunky or slow, but it's really the quickest way you can run in Warzone, outside of dropping your weapons on the ground. Apex has more crazy abilities than Warzone, which allows players to be far more creative with their movements. This can make for a very frustrating game to master. Finding the game you want to play or finding a balance is crucial to the way you want the game to be played. If you give characters too much movement, you make a very fast-paced game. If you give your characters too little movement, you can end up with a game like Rainbow Six Siege or Arma. It's also important to make sure that the right characters have the right speed. A tanky character should have slower speed or restrictive running abilities compared to a flanker or a DPS character. You also don't want your glass cannons to be so quick that it can't be touched. There are some exceptions like Valorant where every character has the same base health, and they all have the same base speed as well, but it's only their abilities that allow them to sprint or teleport. In this case, it's a matter of the ability itself not being abused or so overpowered that they can't lose a fight. Lastly, you also want to make sure that there are limitations to your movement system. This way your characters aren't able to change momentum and abilities to fly around the map, unless you want to make something similar to Titanfall 2. All of these methods can work, but they really do change the overall way the game would be played. They all require skill, but of a different kind. Movement is very important to each game. It not only affects how players will use each character, but it also affects the core design. That keeps the game balanced and fun. I hope you found this video informative and enjoyable. I am Mr. Rain, and thank you for watching.